There's a common misconception, mainly from the left, when it comes to gun control and about what guns are, military um, firearms, especially when it comes to small arms and stuff. And I'm talking like rifles and whatnot that way. There's a kind of a misconception that the AR-15 is a military rifle. It is not a military rifle. It is very similar to some military rifles, but AR-15 does not have the ability to um, fire, fully automatic or even like a three-shot burst or anything that way. Whereas like the M16 does. That is kind of the cousin to the AR-15, and it was designed by the same people. Um, Everything that way, but it is not a. The AR-15 is not a military rifle. Yes, it is used for some training and stuff that way, but when they're actually um, in battle, it is not. At least not by the U.S. military. Maybe a few that use them, here and there, but it is not considered what I would consider really a military rifle, whatever. But I decided I'd kind of do a little bit of research into this, and I knew a lot of this stuff before, but I wanted to do a little more research, and so I decided I'd talk about some of the military rifles of the past. During the American Revolution, the when the Constitution was written and everything, flintlock rifles were the kind of dominant rifle at the time. They were kind of the most common type of rifle. That's what was used by the military and by the militia, which would be the U.S. citizens who were fighting back. They were using flintlock rifles. They were their own, most of them were their own personal rifles that they'd own for hunting and everything that way. In the 1800s, we actually have quite a bit of upgrades in the small arms industry. Mainly, we're talking rifle barrels start to become a little more commonplace. But militaries weren't really into rifle barrels because for them it was less about accuracy, which is rifle barrel helps increase accuracy. What a rifle barrel does is it creates spin on the bullet and stabilizes that bullet through the air, so it makes it a lot more accurate, especially at longer distances. Militaries were not really interested in that at the time because at that time militaries were they still lining up across an open field in large troop formations, and they'd take shots at each other. Kind of a stupid military tactic. That is, yeah, definitely. But that was the military tactics at the time. So it wasn't really about accuracy. It was about speed. And when we're talking like flintlock, where you have to load the bullet through the barrel and everything that way, it was all about speed. It was a lot quicker to do that with a smoothbore and sacrifice accuracy for speed. So the better rifles, the better guns were actually in the hands of civilians. They were much better quality because they could shoot more accurately. They could shoot farther, everything that way. Because they, the rifle barrel had all that. They were a lot more accurate, a lot better firearms than the military used. Then we go into the mid 1800s. Then we're starting to get into, we got some percussion rounds. We're starting to get into like the bullets more like we see today. Lever actions. The first lever action was developed in 1826, but not like we think of lever actions today. Henry rifle was developed in 1860. That is a lot more like what we think of today. It's got the tube magazine underneath the barrel. It's got the lever action. It cocks the hammer back. Everything just like we think of today is very, very similar to what we think of as our lever action of that we think of today. Very, very good quality gun. Again, it was not designed for the military. It was designed before the Civil War for civilians. Yes, it was actually finally used by the military. The lever actions was not actually the Henry rifle, it was a different version of it, but a version that was actually not quite as good. It actually required, I think it was called the Stevenson rifle, where it was considered a lever action. But unlike the Henry rifle, it did not cock the hammer back. You had to manually cock the hammer back after. All it did was it ejected the round and brought the next round up, and you still had to manually cock the hammer. Henry rifle cocked the hammer back as you reload, as it ejected and brought up the next round. So again, civilians had better rifles than the military. Now we're getting into late 1800s, and in 1898, the Mauser bolt-action rifle was made. It is what was fought with in World War I and World War II. It was a lot better quality. That same bolt action that was made by Mauser is either the same bolt or very copied off of that bolt action. Pretty much all the bolt action guns that you see even to today. Very, very, it may be a little bit different, but pretty much the same bolt action that Mauser had. It completely changed the firearm industry. It was not, definitely not. It was not semi-automatic. It was made strictly for the, it was bolt action. So you still had to, just like you think of today. We get into the 1930s now, and we're in peacetime. But the M1 Garand comes along. It was kind of the first semi-automatic gun, or definitely one of the very first semi-automatic rifles out there. It was developed in the 1930s. Again, it was used by the U.S. military. But at the same point, they were still using a lot of their Mauser action, bolt action rifles as well. The Mauser action, whether it was a Mauser or a repeat or copy of it, they were still using a lot of bolt actions, but they also were starting to implement some of these semi-automatic firearms during World War II. This was something that the U.S., it was kind of heavy. It was a large caliber. It was very difficult to use by today's standards, but it allowed for a lot quicker shots. You could have a magazine that you could, ejectable magazine. So it actually worked out very well for the U.S. military. And we get into Korea. U.S. is still using the M1 Garand, but the Soviets come up with something. This is when we start really thinking about military firearms. The AK-47 was developed by the Russians as their premier firearm for their military. It was not allowed to be owned by their civilians. This is the first time we actually have a firearm or any kind of weapon of any sort, really, that is developed, especially in the small arms anyway, that is developed strictly for the military. And it was not by the U.S. It was by the Russians. The Russians are the ones that they did not allow their citizens to own these, only their military. That's when it starts getting into where people start thinking that firearms were developed for the military, because in reality firearms were not developed by the military. Military would oftentimes use civilian developed firearms because they were better than what they'd had in the past. And a lot of times the militaries were slow to develop these guns, and that comes into the 1950s. U.S. is getting outgunned by the AK-47. We're into the 50s, I think even into the 60s, maybe somewhere around the 50s or 60s. I'm not sure when this was exactly, I don't remember for sure, but the Army was looking for new technology after they'd seen the AK-47, and the ability that it had and whatnot. And they were looking for an upgrade to their firearm. Steps in. Now it's time for Armalite Rifle Company to step in. They submitted their first firearm, which was actually an AR-10, which is a little bit heavier bullet. It was a bigger bullet than an AR-15. But an AR-10, the U.S. military kicked it out, didn't even test it. They said it didn't even look like a real gun. It was lighter. It looked like a toy. Would not even test it. Would not even disqualify. They disqualified it as soon as they brought it, and wouldn't go. So they kept testing all these other rifles, testing all this other stuff. Didn't really like anything they had. Armalite, the Armalite Rifle Company, they kept submitting this design, which is they've kind of worked on a little bit, changed a few things, and actually submitted a smaller caliber, and went down to the 5.56. Finally, military did not like it because they said the bullet was too small, didn't pack enough punch, whatever, that way. They finally decided when they were testing, they finally decided that that this was the premier rifle. But this was not the AR-15 that you think of today. This is what is known as the M16, because the M16 can also be fired in a fully automatic or 3-shot bursts. They've got different options. The AR-15 is strictly semi-automatic. So the M16 is kind of the precursor or whatever, or the cousin of the AR-15. The U.S. Army did not like it at all. They've changed it now. They've worked on it little by little. But the thing is, the whole deal is now we've got, we've improved on the design. It's gotten even more reliable, and the M16 is kind of the premier military firearm. They're looking for upgrades now as well, but the M16 is kind of the premier firearm of the military for the last 60 years or better. The AR-15 is simply just a civilian copy of that rifle. It is semi-automatic. It is completely outdated as far as military use, when you cannot use, it is not, you cannot have an AR, it's not fully automatic. So it's kind of behind the times. This is really the first times in world history. It's really back into the 60s, I think it was in the 40s when the AK-47 was designed. That is really the time when they started designing, small arms and military weapons only. So it's kind of a new concept. I mean, we went from hundreds and hundreds of years where the civilians market was actually much, much better than the military market, military firearms, because the civilians market, when you allow free trade and you're free enterprise that way, military, civilians, anytime you got government controlling stuff, it's going to be slower process to develop and increase the productivity compared to the civilian market, because civilian market, it is strictly on the better quality. So the better quality is going to sell better because the civilians are going to find that. So for many, many years, the civilians have always been actually better armed when it comes to small arms than the military. This is really the first time in history that it's been the opposite. And that is exactly why the AR-15 is not a weapon of war, and is actually something that I believe that everyone should own, as long as you want one. Obviously, there's people that probably don't need it because they don't want it. Two, they don't feel comfortable, whatever, with it, which I can understand, whatever, if you don't feel comfortable. But the thing is, when you're talking potential home invaders, and I know this is what we always kind of go back to, but it's because it's true. If you got people invading your home, and there's multiple, because a home invasion is not going to be one person with whatever. You're talking armed home invaders, it's going to be multiple, almost every time, like 99.9% of the time. The statistics are incredibly rare to see a single person in a home invasion. Wouldn't you want something that you can customize. That's the other thing. AR-15s are very customizable. They're very easy to customize and become proficient with. They're a lot easier to use. They're fairly lightweight. They're easier for a lot of people to use. There's not a lot of recoil. And this is where that 30-round magazine comes in handy, because you're talking, when you're in a stressful situation, you are only as good as your last, as the minimum of your training. Wouldn't you rather have something that gives you more options, more time, more rounds to try and protect yourself if it comes down to that? Because let's be honest, the most dangerous part of any kind of fight, when it comes to a firefight, you can ask military, you can ask law enforcement, anything that way. The most dangerous part of any firefight for the person involved is reloading. It would make a lot more sense to have something with a lot more rounds that you don't have to reload, that you can proficiently stop, than it is to try and limit the amount and then have to reload. In a stressful situation, it is a lot more, a lot easier, a lot better to have the extra rounds and not need them than to need those extra rounds and not have them. That is what it all comes down to, essentially. You have to have what it takes to protect yourself and your family. And if that means having extra rounds, you don't, just because you have 30 rounds doesn't mean you have to shoot all 30 rounds. That's the argument that the left has, is, well, you don't need 30 rounds. Okay, no, I may not need 30 rounds to protect myself, but I'd rather have that. Okay, but what if I need 15? You're limiting it to 10. What if I need 15? You're saying that I don't count because I needed 15? What if there's 5 home invaders? 3 shots per home invader. That's really not that many when you think about it. It's really not all that much. 3 shots. Chances are you're probably going to miss. If you're in a stressful situation, you could miss. It's going to happen. But I would rather have those extra and not need them than to need those and not have them. That's the argument that is the stupidest argument the left can make. And they keep making it. Nobody needs 30 rounds for protection or whatever. No, I may not need that 30 rounds, but I may need more than 9, which is what they're wanting to make legal. They're wanting to make anything over 10, 10 or more illegal, or 10 or more. I may need more than 10. That's not that many, especially if you're talking multiple threats. I may need more than 10, and I don't want to have to reload, because reloading is what is the most dangerous part. Reloading is where you get in trouble. It's better to have that and not need it than to need it and not have it. If you liked the video, enjoyed the video, like it, give it a share, subscribe, and check out this one right up here.